get them on board with a possible U.S.
I'm not talking about money for Greenland yet. I might talk about that. But right now, we are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland, and we're not going to have Russia or China as a neighbor. Okay? I would like to make a deal, the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way.
Friends, welcome. In this video, I'm going to explain to you what kind of trouble Europe is in. And you might not hear these views in other places because this is not going to be the conventional analysis. I'll explain that Europe is in trouble, but only for a brief period, for a few years, and then it won't be in trouble, hopefully. So what's going on? Why is Trump after Greenland? Well, that again will be a full video. But basically, it's because US under Trump feels that it needs to extend its boundaries. That is, make America great again means making America literally greater in size. And the Arctic is also melting. And so because of the melting of the Arctic, many of the passageways north of Greenland are going to disappear, the ice. And so new sea routes are going to appear. And you're going to see a real competition heating up for the Arctic. The US is kind of anticipating that. And of course, Greenland, the minerals in Greenland will also now be more easily accessible for mining, some rare earths, other things. And of course, it's Trump's personal obsession also for his MAGA base. And he wants to leave a legacy in history, like those American presidents who made America greater, kind of like what Putin tried to do unsuccessfully in Ukraine. So Europeans and possibly even the founders of NATO had not imagined that one day one NATO country could attack another. But that possibility is also open today, but I don't think it's going to happen. So why was NATO created in 1949? Basically, for three objectives: keep the Americans in Europe, keep the Russians out. And the third objective was keep the Germans down. Okay, so now Germans down, that's no more an objective. Russians out is still an objective, and keeping the Americans in, I think, is not going to happen. That is, America is going to leave one way or the other. Why? Well, it's not just Trump's personality or the American right's disdain for Europe. I think there are structural reasons. That is, Europe is no longer as important as it was once for the Americans. The new theater is East Asia. That is, in the old days, there were two large sources of industry and power in the world, critical regions. That is, one was Europe. It was industrialized. The other was the United States. And for resource reasons, Middle East had some importance, but much less. And if you control these, then you kind of control the world. And but what has happened since the 1970s is that slowly East Asia has risen in importance. And so it has risen in the importance of the US grand strategy. That is, US initially felt it had to defend Japan, and then it became South Korea and Taiwan. And now it's become all of East Asia, and it's become especially important because the only near rival to the US is China, and it has risen greatly in its technology and industrial capacity. So American attention is shifting, and it's been shifting for the last 15 years towards East Asia. So Europe is not so important, and the threat to Europe also is not that great. I mean, Russia, come on. Russia is like a $2.4 trillion economy, as compared to the United States, 31 trillion, as compared to Europe's something like 26 trillion. So Europe's economy is like 10 times that of Russia. And the United States is far greater than Russia's, at 31 trillion. So there's no real threat from Russia. But there is a growing threat, what the Americans call the pacing threat, from China. That is, China has already hit 20 trillion in dollar terms, and in PPP terms, even much more. And so China is the pacing threat. It's not yet up to American technology levels and per capita income levels. It's far below, but it's catching up. And so both for structural reasons and because of the Trump's personality and because of Trump's the American rights inclinations, Europe is not the critical theater, and they may find it difficult to keep the Americans in. But you can see that the Europeans are terrified. They are constantly acting like American lapdogs. They are constantly kneeling and begging the Americans, like school children, to not leave. They're willing to bend over backwards to whatever America does. This is an actual photo. You can see when American President Trump schooled the European leaders like a headmaster. Americans have been telling them for a long time now to increase their defense spending. Now, there is a bit of a contradiction here. Earlier, the Americans themselves tried to keep defense spending in Europe low. They wanted the Europeans to be dependent on them in the 1990s. And Europeans complied. They kept their defense spending low because they also grew lazy and wanted to spend more on welfare. And they increasingly put more and more regulations on their economy, and the economic growth kind of slowed down, across Europe. And right now, most of Europe is kind of moribund, that is stagnant. Whether it is the UK, which has grown nearly zero, it has been totally stagnant for many years now, ever since Brexit. And now Germany is also stagnant because its cheap energy from Russia is gone, and it's facing increasing competition from China in industrial goods. And across Europe, the same problem is happening. So Europe's economies did not grow, the pie did not grow, and they wanted to spend more and more on welfare. And they didn't have the money they felt for defense. And so they became totally dependent on the United States. So they're terrified if the United States left. I'll give you an example. The Europeans started the problem in Libya. They started bombing. But Obama didn't want to enter. But finally, Obama was forced to enter because the Europeans went begging to him, because they just didn't have the EW aircraft. They didn't have the jammers. They didn't have the surveillance aircrafts. They didn't have the reconnaissance. They didn't have the satellites to give them the imaging. They just didn't have any of those things which make a modern war modern these days. These are highly capital intensive. I mean, America has more EW and spy aircraft than the rest of the world combined. So finally, America was kind of forced into entering into Libya because Obama was actually reluctant after the experiences of Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. And this reluctance to go to war had started well before Trump from the American public. He was responding to that. So the Americans want to kind of withdraw from Europe. The Europeans are eager to keep them in, but the Americans know that. And Stephen Miller, and that is the advisor to the American president, and Vance, the vice president, etc. And even if you see Rubio's largely playing along, they all are eyeing Greenland because they know the Europeans cannot resist. And my feeling is that the Europeans, of course, nobody's going to fight over Greenland, but they are going to slowly acknowledge a sale, either a direct sale to the US, or they're going to slowly adjust to increasing American sovereignty over Greenland because they have no other choice. And they have not also adopted the strategy which, say, the Chinese did of standing up to the bully. That is, Trump sometimes backs off if he feels that he's facing resistance. There's been no resistance from Europe. There has been a resistance from China, and so he backed off. Even from some smaller players like the Houthis, he backed off. So Trump, when he faces real resistance, backs off. But he has faced none, and he knows that Europeans are terrified of Russia, and therefore they will kind of adjust. And why they are terrified of Russia, it's very interesting. I mean, if you look at pure power, there's no comparison. Europe's population is around 514 million, I think. Russia's is only 145 million. That is, Russia is around 14.5 crores in Indian figures, and Europe is about 51, 52 crores. That is, it's more than 3.5 times the size of Russia in population. Even the United States is only about 335, 340 million. That is about 33 crores or 34 crores is the US population. So less than Europe, much less. I mean, Europe is almost twice the size of United States, or at least 75% larger than the United States in population terms. And so why should Europe, which has got 10 times the GDP of Russia at around 26 trillion, when Russia has only about 2.4 trillion in GDP, why should Europe be afraid? Europe should easily be able to match up to Russia. But what has happened is that as a percentage of GDP, Europe has spent too little. That is, there were few countries which even reached 2% of GDP in expenditures. Most Europeans were around 1.5% of GDP in defense spending. And Russia currently in the war is spending about 8%, 7.5%, 8% of GDP. But even before the war, it was consistently spending a lot, 4%, 5% of GDP on defense. And so unlike the Americans, who spend about 3.5 right now, but were earlier spending more, 3.5%, the Europeans just have not converted any of their commercial success into weapons and hard power, what's called hard power. So they are buying time, they need time to do that, and they're not even able to get their act together on Ukraine. That is, they're not able to spend enough on Ukraine. On Ukraine, the American policy has been under Trump and to withdraw. They want to withdraw. They want the burden to be borne by Europe. Unlike Biden, who was willing to bear the burden of Ukraine, the Americans now are not willing to bear it. The Trump administration believes that it is Europe's problem, which to some extent is true. That is, Russia is fighting in Europe, and so it's Europe's problem. Why should America be paying for it? He believes also that Europeans have had a free ride for too long, and they have made us pay, that is, the Americans pay. And he feels that, okay, he probably feels some closeness also to Putin. He likes and admires strongmen, and there is some white nationalism there too. But he feels that, look, I can provide you with non-monetary help, maybe. Even that costs money, like intelligence, reconnaissance, stuff like that. Or I can sell arms to you, but I'm not going to put in hard cash. And Europeans have tried to step in, but have been not very successful because they have not a large enough defense industry to provide the weapons directly. And they're trying to purchase from Americans and provide some weapons. Some they're providing from their own stocks. But they are not able to provide the kind of cover that Ukraine needs, the kind of weapons that Ukraine needs. And slowly, Ukraine is also getting exhausted. So the prospects look like there'll be a negotiated peace in which Ukraine may pay a price. And hence, the Europeans are afraid. So they want to keep the US in the camp for that purpose also. But I think that despite all these fears, I don't think the Americans will totally abandon Europe. I think a deal will be worked out on Greenland, in which the Europeans will back down. But I think the real loser in all of this is going to be Russia. Yes, unlike John Mearsheimer, the great IR professor, I don't believe Russia is going to be the winner in this. I think Russia is going to be the loser in this. Why? Because I'll put out a full video on it later, but I think Putin has shot himself in the foot. The losses to Russia's economy, its military, and its influence in the neighborhood will mean that after this heavy mobilization that it's under ceases, that is, at some point, the war or conflict will end. either Ukraine will sue for peace, or the Europeans will, or maybe at some point, Putin is just going to pass away. But the next leader is going to have huge problems, and I'll come to all of that in another video. But in this transition period, between the time that the Americans are drawing down their commitment and the Russians finally fully realize their losses. By realize, I mean they take into account their losses and demobilize, is the gap which Europe needs security for. And Europe must step up. They must take this period of threat and danger seriously, which they haven't so far. Get off their asses and start working, start spending money, start building an armed forces, which they can easily because of the size of their population, even their per capita income. If you do a per capita income comparison, the US per capita income is about $90,000. European, that is UK plus EU, is around $45,000. And the Russian per capita income is around 17,000. Even that might be an inflation. $17,000. That is, Russia's per capita income is virtually 1/3 of Europe's. And if compared to the United States, it's something like close to 1/5 or 1/6 of United States. So on per capita income basis also, Russia does not match up. It does not match up in population. It does not match up in total GDP. And even if you look at total defense spending, it doesn't match up. If you look at military expenditure, I mean, at 900 billion, and maybe they'll soon cross 1 trillion. The United States is far beyond both of them. But even if you look at Europe's defense expenditure, if you can see the chart in front of you, it is just a little bit below the US. I mean, you could say 25% below, maybe 30% below. But look at where the Russian is. It's tiny defense expenditure. Even in wartime, it's just about 180 billion, I think. So if Europe was to mobilize seriously and take the threat seriously, Russia could not match it. But the problem with military strength is that it takes many years to accumulate. That is, it can take you 10, 20 years to accumulate your full military capacity. I'll give you an example. The US in the Second World War had not fully mobilized even in 1945. That is, US defense production, military production, had not peaked. It would have peaked in 1946. Nowadays, with higher technology, it becomes even more difficult. That is, to fully realize its strength may take a decade or more for Europe. And then it would be far beyond anything that Russia has. Russia, on the other hand, is in decline. Its population is declining. Its GDP is in decline, actually. It looks like it's increased, but that's because of the war expenditure, defense expenditure. Otherwise, its non-military expenditure is actually in decline. So I'll come to all of that later. But for now, what I want to tell you is that the Western alliance is fraying for structural reasons, not just because of, say, Ukraine or Greenland. And East Asia is acquiring more importance in US strategy and other parts of the world. And Europe cannot keep the United States in NATO for too long. Its commitment, even after Trump goes, may not be very strong towards NATO, whoever comes in, because maybe the US population also doesn't want to spend money there. The Cold War was a different thing. In the Cold War, there was a real Soviet threat. Even the unipolar movement of the 1990s, 2000s was okay because with very little expenditure, you could maintain that kind of dominance, because basically Russia had disappeared as a military power and China was too weak in those days. But now it's different. Now with budget tightening and different challenges like China, the US also has to prioritize. So Europe needs to get its act together for its own purposes, for the purposes of the war in Ukraine and Russia, and be ready for exciting times ahead. I'll come back soon. Thank you. See you.